Hello everyone, and welcome back to our next lab recording. This presentation will cover the two reproductive systems. I personally find that the reproductive system is extremely fascinating, especially because we have two versions, one in the male and one in the female. The reproductive systems are extremely unique because together these two systems can create new human beings. Both the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system have different anatomical structures and function very differently as well. But if there is a system that embodies teamwork, it is the reproductive systems. So as we can deduce by the name, the purpose of the reproductive system is to create new human beings. It is these systems that facilitate reproduction. Without the cohesive action of the male and female reproductive systems together, we would not be a very long-lasting species at all. Now, the way that we are going to approach learning the reproductive systems is by first learning the anatomy of the male reproductive system and then moving on to the anatomy of the female reproductive system. And after we have learned all of the components of each system, we're going to take a look at the reproductive physiology and see how these systems work to produce gametes and also how they work together to perpetuate the species. So both the male and the female reproductive systems have unique anatomical structures that will be the backbone of the function of these systems. We have many components and many organs that facilitate the function of these systems, but in particular, the prime drivers of the reproductive system are the gonads. These are the testes in males and the ovaries in females. The gonads are the organs that are responsible for producing gametes, which are known as the sex cells. Without the cells that are produced by these organs, we would have no reproduction taking place. So we're about to see the generalized structure of the male reproductive system. But what we want to understand about this system in particular is that its components are specialized to facilitate the transport of sperm cells to the female gamete known as the oocyte. Oocytes are also known as egg cells. When a sperm cell meets an egg cell, the sperm cell is going to penetrate through the outer layers of the oocyte. And we call this process fertilization. Once an oocyte has been fertilized, this will be the beginning of a new member of our species. The male reproductive system contains an intricate set of tubes that function to direct sperm cells out of the male reproductive system. But along with the components that contribute to the tubular system, we're also going to have accessory glands. And these glands are going to be very necessary in producing the fluid known as semen. Semen is a substance that will coat the sperm cells, protecting them, nourishing them, and facilitating their transport out of the body. One of the constituents of semen is fructose, which is going to be used by the sperm cells to aid in their journey. The prostate gland, the two seminal vesicles, and the bulbourethral glands are the accessory glands that will contribute to the production of semen that will bathe the sperm cells. We will shortly see the accessory glands and where they can be found, but we first must describe the generalized anatomy of the male reproductive system. So I've already said that the male reproductive system contains a tube system that's going to transport sperm cells out of the body. And we're actually going to see that that tubular system begins with the testes, which is the male gonad. So it is here that we're going to begin the male anatomy. So the testes will sit in this sac of skin known as the scrotum. The scrotum will wrap around the two testicles and regulate how far the testes sit from the body. Now on the next slide, we're going to see the structures that can be found inside of the testes, but you'll also find this structure that's wrapping around the backside of the testes, known as the epididymis. The epididymis is a very coiled tube that can be found hugging the testes, whose major function is to store sperm cells. The testes are responsible for producing sperm cells, and when sperm cells are matured and ready to leave the body, they're going to go to the epididymis until they are released. At the inferior side of the epididymis, you'll see this tube coming out of the bottom that is known as the vas deferens. As there are two testicles, each will have their own epididymis, and each epididymis will connect to their own vas deferens. The vas deferens will ascend and loop over the urinary bladder, which we can see found right here. And the vas deferens is eventually going to enter another structure known as the ejaculatory duct, which I will have labeled in just a couple slides. The ejaculatory duct can be found here, contained within the prostate gland, which is the first of our accessory structures that's going to contribute to the production of semen. From the ejaculatory duct, sperm cells are going to make their way into the urethra, which can be found contained within the penis. In the male reproductive system, the urethra will be shared with our urinary system. So both urine and semen will leave the male reproductive system from the penis. The other structure that we have labeled on this slide is the spermatic cord. And the spermatic cord can be found containing the vas deferens as the vas deferens ascends from the testicles. Many different structures can be found contained within the spermatic cord, but three structures that I would like you to specifically know that are contained within the spermatic cord are the vas deferens, the testicular artery, and the testicular vein. The spermatic cord will course upwards through the inguinal canals and give a pathway for all of these vessels to ascend. You can see that the spermatic cord is shown on this slide wrapping around our testicular artery, testicular vein, and the vas deferens. The testicular artery will supply blood to the testicles, while the testicular vein will drain blood from the testicles. But the vas deferens is the main structure that we want to be focused on that can be found in the spermatic cord. Again, as we saw on the last slide, the vas deferens is part of the tubular system of the male reproductive system. And as we've taken a section of the testicle, you can see that the tubular system is quite intricate as we move into the epididymis and also into the testicle. The testicles will contain these structures known as seminiferous tubules, and it is inside of the seminiferous tubules that sperm cells are produced. Once sperm cells have matured, they're going to leave the seminiferous tubules and travel through this area known as the reedy testes. And the reedy testes will direct sperm cells into the epididymis. This is where sperm cells will be stored once they are matured. The epididymis will loop around here, and you can see how coiled this truly is. But eventually, the epididymis will flow into the vas deferens, which will take sperm cells up through the spermatic cord, looping around the urinary bladder, and eventually through the ejaculatory duct and into the urethra, where they will eventually be ejected from the body. So we really want to have a good understanding of the difference in function between the seminiferous tubules and the epididymis. Sperm cells are going to be produced in the seminiferous tubules, but they're going to be stored in the epididymis once they have matured. As ejaculation takes place, sperm cells are going to move from the epididymis into the vas deferens around the urinary bladder, where they will be met by the secretions of the accessory glands. I mentioned a few slides ago that the accessory glands that help produce semen are the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands. Each of these structures will produce secretions that will help lubricate sperm cells and nourish them as they leave the male reproductive system. These accessory glands will secrete into the ejaculatory duct as well as into the urethra, which will complete the pathway that sperm takes as it leaves the body. In terms of the male anatomy, I want you to have a very good understanding of this pathway. So on this slide, I've posted you all a mnemonic that you can use to follow along and better grasp this pathway. The mnemonic for this pathway is 7 up. We'll start at the seminiferous tubules where sperm cells are being produced, and then make our way to the epididymis where sperm cells are going to be stored. They'll pass their way through the vas deferens and the ejaculatory duct, where they will eventually enter the urethra and leave the body through the penis. This isn't a perfect mnemonic, as N stands for nothing, but I do hope this serves you in remembering the pathway that sperm takes as it leaves the male reproductive system. So when looking at the cat, we can see these structures and also see their general location and overview. Starting from the gonads, you can see the testes right here, which will contain the epididymis on its backside. The epididymis will loop around and form the vas deferens, which can be contained within the spermatic cord. This spermatic cord will wrap around the vas deferens, the testicular artery, and the testicular vein. And you can actually see the vas deferens coursing out here as it's going to make its way behind the urinary bladder, travel through the ejaculatory duct, and enter into the urethra, which will be contained by the penis and serve both the reproductive system and the urinary system. If we zoom in a little further, you can also see the prostate gland closely associated with the urethra as well. This picture will just give us a better view of the spermatic cord and the testes. But we can also see the testes shown on this slide with the epididymis that we can see wrapping around the backside. As we course up the spermatic cord, you can actually see the vas deferens as well as that testicular artery that's going to be contained in here also. So on that note, that concludes the anatomy of the male reproductive system. There's quite a few components to the tubular system and also several accessory glands. We have quite a few components to this system, which is what makes the male reproductive anatomy a little bit more complex than the female reproductive anatomy. So we're now going to switch gears and learn the anatomy of the female reproductive system. So starting with the female gonad, we will have the ovaries. Just as can be found in the male, we'll have two different gonads in the female reproductive system, and each can be found producing the female sex cells. I'll say once more that the female gamete is also known as the egg cell, or the oocyte. These cells will be released from the ovaries and captured by the fallopian tubes. Each fallopian tube will be closely associated with one of the ovaries, and it will direct the oocyte into the uterus. I'll discuss the uterus very shortly, but there's one other structure on the fallopian tube that I do want to mention. These little finger-like projections here, found on the end of the fallopian tube, are called fimbriae. The fimbriae are not directly attached to the ovaries, but they will be found very close. Once the oocyte is released from the ovary, the fimbriae are going to be used to direct the oocyte into the fallopian tube. These need to be attached here because the fallopian tubes are not attached to the ovaries. Once the oocytes have been released and the fimbriae have directed them inside of the fallopian tubes will carry the oocytes out into the uterus. And if fertilization by sperm cells have taken place, the now blastocysts will implant into the wall of the uterus where it will continue to grow into a baby. The uterus will house the growing baby until the baby is ready to be born. The edge or entry point into the uterus is known as the cervix, and we can see this structure shown here separating the uterus from the vagina. The vaginal canal will connect to the external environment and will be the entry location for sperm cells coming in for fertilization. You can see the female reproductive system and its associated structures shown on this slide. We'll see our ovary found here and the associated fallopian tube that's going to travel out. We can follow the fallopian tube down to indicate that this is going to be the uterus. And if we continue to follow to the other side, we will see our other fallopian tube shown right here. There will be two fallopian tubes found in the female reproductive system. The uterus will eventually transition into the cervix, which will open to the external environment through the vagina. We'll see the urinary bladder here that will connect to the urethra, which will open up to the external environment just in front of the vagina. One other structure that we'll see on this slide is the ovarian ligament, which will be used to suspend the ovary and keep it in position inside of the body. We can see that ligament shown here. Now, the last structure that we're going to discuss in relation to the female reproductive system are the mammary glands. Mammary glands will be primarily made up of glandular tissue and adipose tissue, and their primary purpose is to produce milk that will help to nourish the offspring. You'll see this tissue here is adipose tissue, and down here we'll see alveolar glands, which will produce the milk. These glands are exocrine glands, and we can see that because of the duct system we'll find in the mammary glands. The duct system will eventually flow into lactiferous ducts, which will eventually lead out of the nipples. Surrounding the nipples is this darker area known as the areola, and we can see the areola and the nipple again on this slide. In the mammary glands, we'll have lots of glandular exocrine tissue as well as adipose that can be found all around it. The glandular tissue can be organized into lobules, which will produce milk that will flow out of the lactiferous ducts into the lactiferous sinuses and out of the nipples. Upon nourishing the baby up until the point of birth, the female reproductive system will also be responsible for nourishing the offspring after birth as well.